بلاتي ها بلاتي صافي. شوف الضيوف من لهنا.
خدمة لقيم التنوير والحداثة والجمال.
Being retired now from work, which I enjoy a lot, I must say, and hope that all the young colleagues here and there.
وزاد مع الدورة الثالثة عشرة مهرجان الفنون المشهدية تجسيدا لثقافة الاعتراف اللي رغب بالامتياز في نصوص المسرحية المماثلة.
Mais c'est quoi ce truc tout blanc des yeux? Pas ton, ce blanc des yeux. Tout est touché, tout est trou. Ta bouche, tes yeux, tes narines.
ورده بيضاء ولكن لما يمسك لي فرصه واحد بلاد سلم تتعرف غير vers la montagne. Inquiet. أن العدو له عين على قبرص وقد يحصل.
حضرات السيدات والسادة، مرحبا بكم في الرحلة 17 لمهرجان طنجة للفنون المشهدية المنظم من طرف المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة بطنجة، المملكة المغربية الشريفة. رحلة يقودها الفنان ويؤطرها الأكاديمي. سنحلق معا وسويا على امتداد 4 أيام في فضاء مسارح الجنوب عبر العالم رؤى ديكولونياليا، عبر ندوات علمية، ماستر كلاس، توقيع آخر الإصدارات لكتاب مرموقين، وعروض مسرحية. الأكيد أنه برنامج حافل لأجل حضوركم البهي، كما الأمر لمقام الشخصية المكرمة هذه السنة.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's our pleasure and honor to welcome you to the 17th edition of Performing Tangier Festival organized by the International Center for Performance Studies. It is a 4-day journey that is led by artists and scholars from Morocco and from all the corners of the world. This year's edition is on Theater of the Global South, Decolonial Visions. We have an interesting program this year that includes conferences, performances, workshops, and a masterclass. Of course, we are delighted to meet you again after the pandemic, which we hope would be over soon. As you know, last year's virtual festival achieved a great success despite the difficult global circumstances.
سعداء بلقياكم مباشرة بعد لقائنا الرقمي خلال الرحلة 16 باعتبار الوضع الصحي السائد وطنيا وعالميا، وهي مناسبة لنقول إننا لم ننفرد بذلك، لكن كنا من المميزين، إلا أننا لم نروي ظمأ شغبنا التنظيمي وشغفنا المسرحي وشرف الارتواء من معينكم العلمي. أستأذن المتألق دائما محمد قوتي لأقول مسترجعين ومستحضرين بعضا مما ضمت مقامات محفلنا هذا من وقفات علمية وفنية تبتغي الفحوى في المعنى بما كان لها من أوجه الفضل في وقفتنا على المراتب بتنوع لويناتنا ومشاربنا وأهوائنا، حيث كان لسان حالنا ولا يزال يعبر عما يلتمع في الأفئدة والألباب. بقي علم، بقي خاطر، بقيت معرفة، بقي خاطر. هذا مقتطف من عروس الأسرار. محفلنا اليوم يعطي انطلاقته السيد رئيس المركز الدولي لدراسة الفرجة بطنجة الدكتور خالد أميل حول كلمة حول التظاهرة.
Please join me in welcoming Dr. Khalid Amin, the president of the ICPS, to deliver the opening statement.
كنت ناعس حبلي انا باقي الاخر. مساء الخير. مسارح الجنوب رؤية ديكولونياليا. شكلت أوروبا عبر التاريخ المرجعية الصامتة والثابتة وغير المكشوفة للفن المسرحي منذ الزمن المسرحي الأول أو الزمن المسرحي الأوروبي الأول مع الإغريق القدامى، على الرغم من الإمكانات الهائلة التي تتوفر عليها مسارح العالم. فتاريخ المسرح الغربي هو مجرد سرد أوروبي محلي تم تسويقه على أساس أنه كوني على حساب سرود أخرى وبداية أخرى، كما أنه لم تكن الحداثة العربية ممكنة بدون حالة استعمارية أو كولونياليتي. تعد هذه الأخيرة مؤسسة للأولى بدل كونها مصوغة منها أو تشبهها في التركيب البنائي. والمسرح لا يحيد عن هذا التصور، ذلك أنه استقدم إلى عالمنا العربي مدعوما من لدن حملة نابليون على مصر. منذ ذلك الحين شكلت الحملة النابليونية بداية تفاعل متضارب بين الحداثة والاستعمار، فجاء تبني العرب للمسرح في صيغته الغربية نتيجة لهذا التفاعل المفارق، ثم تلته لحظة الرجة والوعي بالذات، ولحظات أخرى من بينها الأفق الديكولونيالي الذي نحن بصدده اليوم. يمثل مفهوم مسارح الجنوب بوصف الجنوب كيانا معرفيا لا واقعا جغرافيا أو ماديا، هو دعوة إلى الغوص في شعرية المقاومة وسياساتها ضد نماذج هيمنة، سواء نماذج يعني متمركزة أوروبيا أو نماذج أخرى. مسرحية كانت أم غير ذلك، فهو الجنوب الإبستيمولوجي وليس الجنوب الجغرافي. يتسم هذا الجنوب العالمي بتعددية معرفية تنتج داخل مناطق الاحتكاك أو ما يسميه البعض ب zones of friction بين إبدالات متناقضة، سواء داخل الشمال الجغرافي أم الجنوب الجغرافي، وذلك ضمن سياقات سياسية وثقافية وتاريخية مختلفة. تتسم الحالة الجنوبية إذن بعودة التابع سبالتن ومعذب الأرض، يعني وهنا الإحالة مباشرة لسبيفاك وفانون. لا نسعى من خلال نقاشنا الحالي تقديم كل الإجابات على قضايا تهم ممارستنا المسرحية وكيف نعيش مسرحنا، بقدر ما نأمل أن على الأقل نطرح مزيد من الأسئلة على طاولة نقاش انطلاقا من الجنوب كأفق للتفكير. أن يكون المسرح الوطني السعودي ضيف شرف هذه الدورة هو امتداد لأواصر الأخوة التي جمعت ولا تزال بين الشعبين السعودي والمغربي، وهو صورة حقيقية أيضا للتعامل الثقافي والعلمي الذي ما فتئ منذ عقود، يعود بالنفع العظيم على المؤسسات العلمية والأكاديمية والفنية ومنتسبيها، كما أنه اعتراف بالمكانة الرفيعة التي يحتلها المسرح السعودي في وجدان المسرحيين العرب. لذلك فإن المركز الدولي وهو يحظى بشرف استضافة هيئة المسرح والفنون الأدائية بالمملكة العربية السعودية الشقيقة، لا يغمره اليقين بأن هذه الدورة ستكون من دوراته المتميزة التي ستسهم في تعزيز منعطف الأداء الذي نحن شركاء في تطويره والمساهمة في فتح آفاقه الإنسانية والكونية. الصديقات والأصدقاء الأعزاء، لولاكم لما حققنا ما نعتبره مكتسبات المركز، وبدونكم بطبيعة الحال ما كنا لنصل إلى الدورة 17. لا نخفيكم أن مهرجان طنجة للفنون المشهدية استطاع خلال العقد المنصرم أن يحلق عاليا بفضل دعمكم الرمزي والمادي والمعنوي، ومن هنا لا يسعنا إلا أن نتوجه بجزيل الشكر والعرفان والامتنان أيضا إلى كل المؤسسات الداعمة والأشخاص المعنويين الذين رافقونا في هذه الرحلة، ونخص بالذكر وزارة الشباب والاتصال والثقافة، قطاع الثقافة، ولاية جهة طنجة تطوان الحسيمة، رئاسة جامعة عبد الملك السعدي، كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان، المديرية الجهوية لوزارة الشباب والثقافة والاتصال قطاع الشباب بجهة طنجة تطوان الحسيمة، المسرح الوطني محمد الخامس، المعهد الدولي لتناسج ثقافات فرجة، جامعة نيو إنجلاند، وطبيعة الحال اللائحة تطول بالأسماء، أعتذر إن كنت قد نسيت أحد. وإلى كل الإعلاميين والصحفيين الذين واكبوا فعاليات مشاهديتنا على مر 16 سنة، والشكر موصول أيضا إلى الثلة الكريمة من الفنانين والباحثين المتواجدين معنا اليوم، وشكرا لكم.
شكرا دكتور خالد أمين على هذه الكلمة المقتضبة باسم التظاهرة أو مهرجان طنجة للفنون المشهدية. الآن نعطي الكلمة للكاتب والأستاذ محمد قوتي، كلمة باسم المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة بطنجة.
Now we would like to welcome to the podium the playwright Muhammad Qawti to give his word.
مساء الخير. عروس الأسرار ثانية، عود على بدء. ترتب الصبر على كل شيء إلا على وقفة الواقف، فإنها ترتبت عليه حين دخل كل بيت فما وسعه، وشرب من كل مشرب فما روي، وحار في الصمود حيث حار كل شيء فيه، وخرج بالائتلاف وخرج بالاختلاف، ولم يشك في العارف حين شك العارف فيه، حتى علم ما علم، فكان علمه إيدانا بالتعرض له، ولم يقبله الأغيار ولم تزحزحه المآرب. نحج مرة أخرى إلى رحاب محفل المركز الدولي لدراسة الفرجة، وهو يتماثل مع أناه المولع حد الولع بطنجة المشهدية. ولحجتنا كما هو حالنا في كل حول طعم ما ينبجس عن الاحتفاء الفرح بسنة أخرى تنضم إلى تدانينا العلمي والمعرفي والروحي، مسترجعين ومستحضرين بعضا مما ضمت مقامات محفلنا هذا من وقفات علمية وفنية تبتغي الفحوى في المعنى بما كان لها من أوجه الفضل في وقفتنا على المراتب بتنوع لويناتنا ومشاربنا وأهوائنا، حيث كان لسان حالنا ولا يزال يعبر عما يلتمع في الأفئدة والألباب. بقي علم، بقي خاطر، بقيت معرفة، بقي خاطر. نحج مرة أخرى ونحن موائل مجنحون إلى طنجة، رجاء الاجتناح على عودتنا على ما عودتنا عليه من أسئلة تجمعنا على العلم الذي هو المعرفة التي هي المعرفة، وما جنوحنا هذا إلا جنوح العاقل الذي عليه كما أوصى شيخ الحصافة أن يؤنس ذوي الألباب بنفسه ويجرئهم عليها حتى يسيروا حرصا على سمعه وبصره ورأيه، فيستنيم إلى ذلك ويريح له قلبه، ويعلم أنهم لا يغفلون عنه إذا هو غفل عن نفسه. ولعل المناسبة شرط لاستحضار ما اغتم به حينها من اغتم من مجيش الوجدان السالب المستلب داخل دوائر الثقافة والفن في أرخبيلاتنا، فتعرضوا لما نحن فيه قصد تثبيط عزائمنا والحط من هممنا وتهجين مبتغانا، فعابوا مسلكنا المرتبط بحرقة الأسئلة الذي سعيه تذكية العقول وعارضوا ارتباطنا بالعلماء الذي سعيه العلم بما هو معرفة والمعرفة بما هي المعرفة، ووجدوا لهم العدد والأعوان فأغنانا ما نحن فيه عنهم، مجيشون حانقون وعدد وتبع مخدوعون. وسرنا ولم نلتمس أعذار السالكين في الطريق إلى حضرة الوقفة التي دوننا ودونها وديان محيقة ومفازات عميقة. وسألنا العالم بالطريق: يا عالما بالطريق، إن العين لتسود في هذا الوادي والطريق يبدو كأنه مليء بالأهوال، فما طول هذا الطريق أيها الرفيق؟ فأجاب العالم بالطريق: إن لنا في الطريق 7 أودية، أول الأودية هو وادي الطلب، ثم وادي العشق، ثم وادي المعرفة، ووادي الاستغناء عن الصفة، ووادي التوحيد الطاهر، ثم وادي الحيرة، ثم وادي الحيرة الصعب. أما الوادي السابع فهو وادي الفقر والفناء، وبعد ذلك لن يكون لك سلوك بالطريق، فإن تدرك نهايته يتلاشى مصيرك، وإن تكن لك قطرة ماء فإنها تصبح بحرا ضخما. ولعل المناسبة شرط لاستحضار الاندهاش الأول وما تلاه من اندهاش حين أدمنا على ما يتطارحه حملة السؤال في حلقة طنجة، ونحن أسارى شعور انتابنا ولازمنا كخصاصة المدمن لا يقاوم، شعور بأن بنا إلى هذا كله حاجة شديدة لكي لا يطالنا ما طال صاحب الجواب التائه حين سأل شيخ الحصافة: ما خير ما يؤتى المرء؟ فأجابه: غريزة عقل. وسأله: فإن لم يكن؟ فأجابه: تعلم علم. فسأله: فإن حرمه؟ فأجابه: صدق اللسان. فسأله: فإن حرمه؟ فأجابه: سكوت طويل. فسأله: فإن حرمه؟ فأجابه: ميتة عاجلة. ولعل الاندهاش الذي انتابنا طيلة عقد و6 سنوات أبعدنا عن الصخور الباطنية وأمننا منها وهي تغازل سفننا غزل عرائس البحر لعوليس قصد الإطاحة به لبراكين، كم حسنت لذة للمرء قاتلة من حيث لم يدري أن السم في الدسم، من لي برد جماح من غوايتها كما يرد جماح الخيل باللجوم. ولعل الاندهاش ذاته تبتنا في أوامر الأخلاق حتى نضع الحس والإدراك في موضع دون المواضع، بحبنا العلم وملازمتنا له واجترار الألفة بيننا وبينه، ليكون هو لهونا ولذتنا وسلوتنا وبلغتنا. وبمجالسة العلماء والعارفين وحسن الاستماع إليهم ونحن على أن نسمع منهم أحرص على أن نقول، وبتمام إصابة الرأي والقول عند القول، وبوجوب السؤال في السؤال والفصل في الفصل والصدق في الصدق والعهد في العهد والجود في الجود والود في الود والتواضع في التواضع والقناعة في القناعة والخير في الخير والحذر في الحذر والسماحة في السماحة والحياء في الحياء والخصلة في الخصال بلا مواربة. وبقدر ما تبثنا اندهاشنا في أوامر الأخلاق أقصانا من دهاليز الخصال المذمومة، من باب أخوف ما يكون من مواجهة الجاهل بالعلم والجافي بالفقه والعي بالبيان، ومما يكون من سخافة المتكلم وانتحال رأي الأغيار والتطاول على الأصحاب والتفاخر بالعلم والمروءة وعدم إمهال المتكلم حتى ينقضي حديثه ومغالبته على كلامه والاعتراض عليه وكثر التسرع إلى الجواب، تأمينا لأنفسنا من شر الجهالة إن قرابة أو جوارا أو إلفة. كنا في غمرة هذا الاندهاش متحفين بعقد و6 سنين وأحوالها خلاقة وثرية وحمالة شآبيب المروءة النادرة، فبوئنا مكانة الند السري فينا، وأونسنا دون جفوة ولا وحشة، وثبتنا في مقام الاعتبار بجود لا تحده ضفاف. عقد و6 سنين اشتهرت فينا ديدنها فجهرت، فالدر يزداد حسنا وهو منتظم، ولا ينقص قدرا غير منتظم. فكانت بردا وسلاما وزوادة طريق تشبعنا خلاله بالاقتداء بنهج شيخ الحصافة حين قال: فأما العلم فيزينك ويرشدك، وأما قلة ادعائه فينفي عنك الحسد، وأما المنطق إذا احتجت إليه فيبلغك حاجتك، وأما الصمت فيكسبك المحبة والوقار. عقد و6 سنوات خلت والخير عن أمام، تداول خلالها العالمون والعارفون الأسئلة التي هي الأسئلة، التمسوا خلالها الأجوبة التي هي الأجوبة، وقفوا في مقام الائتلاف بائتلافه، وقفوا في مقام الاختلاف باختلافه. عانق الائتلاف الاختلاف، عانق الاختلاف الائتلاف، استعادوا سوية رجع السؤال، رمونا بالسؤال، رموا بنا السؤال، استعدنا رجع الكلام واسترجعنا. بقي علم، بقي خاطر، بقيت معرفة، بقي خاطر، بقي أمر، بقيت أمور، فما تعد ولا تحصى عجائبها، ولا تسام على الإكتار بالسأم. لا تعجبا لحسود راح ينكرها تجاهلا، وهو عين الحاذق الفهم. قد تنكر العين ضوء الشمس من رمد، وينكر الفم طعم الماء من سقم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
شكرا الأستاذ محمد قوتي، شكرا جزيلا على هذه الكلمة. شكرا على عروس الشمال لعروس الشمال وفي حضرة أهل العلم والمسرح والفرجة. بامتنان كبير نقول شكرا لمجهودات كل المتدخلين الذين آمنوا بالمشروع الحالم للمركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة، ووثقوا في تجربة طنجة المشهدية التي شارفت عقدها الثاني، فجعلت من لمة حملة السؤال المولعين بالبحث العلمي الجاد محفلا علميا عالميا ومسرحا للفرجة وتبادل الخبرات والتجارب.
Many thanks to the great playwright Mohammed Qawti. So this is an opportunity to thank and honor all those friends who have believed in the ICPS projects that have been enriching the cultural scene for almost than 20 years.
أدعو السيد رئيس جامعة عبد الملك السعدي للتفضل بإلقاء كلمة بالمناسبة.
Please join me in welcoming the president of Abdel Malik Saadi University, Dr. Bushra Al-Mumni, to give his word.
شكرا جزيلا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أولا وقبل كل شيء أعتذر إذا وصلت متأخرا بعد الوقت، وذلك ارتباطا بحركة المرور فقط. أيها السيدات والسادة، كل باسمه وصفته واللقب الذي يليق به. اسمحوا لي في البداية أن أتقدم بالشكر والترحاب لضيوفنا الكرام في فعاليات الدورة 17 من الندوة الدولية طنجة المشهدية التي ينظمها المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة بشراكة منتجة مع كلية الآداب بتطوان بهذه المؤسسة الجامعية النشيطة نيو إنجلند الداعمة. إن اختيار المسرح الوطني السعودي ضيفاً شرفياً لهذه الدورة يأتي ليؤكد مرة أخرى عمق العلاقات التاريخية والأخوية التي تجمع الشعبين المغربي والسعودي تحت قيادة صاحب الجلالة الملك محمد السادس نصره الله وخادم الحرمين الشريفين الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز آل سعود. لقد شهدت جامعة عبد الملك السعدي زخماً نوعياً من الفعاليات العلمية في مسارها الثقافي والفني، ولقد جاء هذا الزخم كي يترجم أهمية الفنون في الرؤية الاستراتيجية التي انخرطت فيها الجامعة بهدف تعزيز التكوين الجامعي للطالب وفتحه على آفاق تسمح له بتنمية قدراته في مختلف جوانبه الروحية والعقلية والوجدانية. وإنه لمن دواعي السرور والابتهاج أن تواصل جامعة عبد الملك السعدي مساراتها العلمية والثقافية بإصرار ومن غير كلل، انسجاماً مع رؤيتها بعيدة المدى التي رسمتها في مجال تحويل المعرفة الفنية إلى نتاج ملموس، وذلك وفق منحيين. المنحى الأول يتأسس على إشراك جل الفاعلين داخلها من أساتذة وطلبة في عقد لقاءات وملتقيات علمية وثقافية. والمنحى الثاني يتأسس على انفتاح المؤسسة على محيطها الواسع بكل تلويناته ومشاربه. ولعلنا في هذه الرؤية ذات المنحيين المذكورين نروم إلى تقوية الإشعاع العلمي والثقافي للجامعة. وإنني لعلى يقين تام بأن مهرجان طنجة للفنون المشهدية يشكل نقطة ضوء حقيقية في جامعتنا المغربية والعربية، وينسجم مع المسار الذي علينا على أنفسنا دعمه وتشجيعه وفق إمكاناتنا وقدراتنا المادية والمعنوية. لقد كان المسرح ولا يزال أباً للفنون لما له من تاريخ عريق في حضارات عديدة، كما يشكل بؤرة لالتقاء الفنون وامتزاج ألوان الإبداعات منذ عهد الإغريق وصولاً إلى اللحظة الراهنة. إن المسرح يمثل القيم الرفيعة والرسائل النبيلة بهدف رسم صورة فنية معبرة عن الواقع الاجتماعي والثقافي من أجل إعادة صياغة ثقافة الشباب وتطوير نظرتهم للحياة وطرح رؤى عميقة للمشكلات والقضايا التي تعيق التقدم والتطور الحضاري مع التركيز على النقاط الإيجابية منها. ولهذا فإن المسرح برموزه وإيحاءاته وإضاءاته قادر على تعميق فهمنا للواقع، إضافة إلى أنه يحرك لدى المشاهد الكثير من الأسئلة والتأملات، بحيث يصبح أكثر قدرة على الفهم والاستيعاب لحركية الحياة. من هنا يتغير المسرح تبني الأفكار المسرحية الجادة من داخل الجامعة وخارجها، وتشجيع المبدعين على التأليف المسرحي وعرض أفكارهم وإبداعاتهم من خلال مخرجين وممثلين متمكنين بهدف دعم الحركة المسرحية. ولا يسعني في النهاية إلا أن أشكر إدارة وأطر جامعة نيو إنجلاند على الاستضافة لهذه التظاهرة، واللجنة المنظمة الصاهرة على إنجاح هذه التظاهرة الثقافية، والجميع على تلبية الدعوة ومشاركتنا هذا المهرجان البهيج، آملين سنة جامعية موفقة مكللة بالنجاح لطلابنا وتحقيقا لإنجازات أساتذتنا، تماشيا مع التوجيهات السامية لصاحب الجلالة الملك محمد السادس نصره الله. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
شكرا دكتور بوش الممني رئيس جامعة عبد الملك السعدي على هذه الكلمة، ومرحبا بكم معنا في الدورة 17. 17 سنة نستمر بثقة في تشجيع تضحياتكم مساهمة ومشاركة وتنظيما، وبه تمكنتم من قلوبنا، فمقامكم رفيع وحضوركم راقي، وتفاعلكم معنا فيه لنا من الطاقة ما يجعلنا دائم الحضور في الساحة الفنية والمسرحية محليا ووطنيا ودوليا إلى ما قدر لنا ذلك، وبكثير من العرفان ممتنون لكم جميعا.
Thank you very much, the President of the University, Abdelmalek Saadi University. Now, we would like to welcome to the podium the Dean of the Faculty of Letters and Humanities in Tétouan, Dr. Mustafa Al-Ghashi, to give his word. And right after that, I would like to invite Dr. Yunus Al-Asad Al-Riyani, the President of the Research Group in Drama and Performance Studies at the Faculty of Letters and Humanities in Tétouan.
إذن الكلمة للسيد عميد كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان، المؤسسة الحاضنة لفرقة البحث المسرحي ومبعث الشرارة الأولى لفكرة المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة. تفضل دكتور. تليه كلمة للدكتور يونس أسعد الرياني رئيس فرقة البحث المسرحي بالكلية.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السيد رئيس الجامعة الدكتور بوشتا المومني، السيد رئيس جامعة نيو إنجلاند بطنجة، السيد رئيس المركز الدولي لمسرح لدراسات الفرجة، السيدة مديرة المعهد الدولي لتناسق الثقافات ببرلين، والسيد مدير فرقة البحث في المسرح والدراما بكلية آداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان، أيها السيدات والسادة طلبة الأعزاء، أيها الحضور الكريم. تستقبل كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان الدورة 17 من فعاليات الندوة الدولية طنجة المشهدية باعتزاز كبير، وهي تفتح ورشا بحثيا مهما يتعلق بمسارح الجنوب عبر العالم. ولعل ما يبعث حقا على الارتياح أن التئام الدورة 17 لمهرجان طنجة الدولية للفنون المشهدية جاء نتاجا لشراكة تنظيمية بين المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة وكلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان في إطار اتفاقية شراكة وتعاون، وهي مناسبة لأتوجه فيها بالشكر إلى المسؤولين في هذا المركز البحثي الجاد على تعاونهم مع كليتنا في تنظيم هذا المهرجان وفي أنشطة وفعاليات علمية سابقة. فدعما منا لمثل هذه المبادرات لا نتوقف عن حث جميع فرق البحث ومختبراته المعتمدة بكلية الآداب على ربط جسور التعاون مع المؤسسات البحثية والوطنية والدولية ومع الشركاء الخارجيين من ذوي الاهتمام المشترك. لما لهذا التعاون من آثار إيجابية على انفتاح الجامعة على محيطها الخارجي، والإفادة من تبادل الخبرات والمعارف بما ينعكس على تنمية مجتمعاتنا وازدهارها. وأرحب باسم كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان بضيف شرف هذه الدورة المسرح الوطني السعودي. مرحبا بكم. وإنها لمناسبة لنعبر فيها عن جزيل الشكر وعميق التقدير لأشقائنا في المملكة العربية السعودية على وفائهم المطلق للروابط التاريخية والإنسانية والثقافية مع وطننا العزيز. ونسعد باستقبال كافة المشاركين الذين سيسهمون بعلمهم وخبرتهم الأكاديمية في إضفاء كثير من الجدة والحيوية البحثية على القضايا المدروسة في الندوات العلمية التي تحتضنها جامعة نيو إنجلاند، وهم بهذا لا ينيرون فضاءات الأكاديمية باجتهاداتهم وتحليلاتهم النافذة فحسب، بل يعمقون أيضا لدى كل من ينتسب إلى هذه الفضاءات الإحساس بأن الموقع الحقيقي لإنتاج الأفكار وإبداعها وتنميتها هو الموقع الجامعي، إذ لا جامعة من دون فكر، ولا فكر بدون جامعة، ولا فن بدون جامعة، ولا جامعة بدون فن. تهنئ كلية الآداب بتطوان المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة إدارة وأساتذة وطلبة على نجاح الدورة 17 لمهرجانهم، سواء على المستوى التنظيمي أو على مستوى الإشعاع الثقافي الذي يحققه المهرجان إعلاميا وإبداعيا، والذي أضحى مهرجان للجامعة المغربية والعربية والدولية ولمسرحييها وطلابها بوصفه ثمرة للعمل الجماعي والمستمر الذي يبذله أعضاء المركز الذي يشكل نموذج للعمل العلمي الجاد والمنتج في ظل الشراكات النوعية التي ما فتئ المركز يوقعها من أجل إغناء الساحة النقدية بدراسات ومنشورات تصبح مراجع علمية لكل الباحثين في الجامعات المغربية والعربية والدولية، سواء باللغة العربية أو باللغة الإنجليزية. إن مهرجان طنجة للفنون المشهدية أصبح يشكل استثناء مع تجارب قليلة حافظت على طابعها الخاص، فهذا المهرجان الذي يعتبر علامة فارقة في انتظامه وتطوره، مؤكدا أهميته في ربط الممارسة المسرحية بالبحث والنقد، مما يسهم في تطوير دينامية المسارح المغربية والعربية عبر التفاعل مع المسارح الكونية، مكنته من استقطاب عروض مهمة ومتميزة محلية وعربية، ولعدد بارز من الأسماء المرموقة عالميا في البحث والنقد المسرحيين. ولعل هذا الإصرار التاريخي في إقامة ندوة دولية تزاوج بين الحضور والترابط عبر تطبيقات رقمية لهو مؤشر على قوة الفكرة وقدرتها على اختراق كل الحدود والصعاب، وكذلك قدرتها على مقاومة الوباء والانتصار إلى قيم البحث والفكر وإبداعية المسرح بوصفه شكلا من أشكال الحياة. فللمسرح روح واحدة تدفعنا نحو بناء هواجسنا وفتحها على إمكانات لترميم أعطاب الذات والبحث أكثر عن صور أخرى لفهم التحولات والأنساق والفرجات الجديدة، كما هو الأمر مع هذه الدورة التي تقربنا أكثر من فنون الشارع وجعلها وجها لوجه مع مشرحة النقد بدل تهميشها وجعلها في خانة المؤجل. وتستغل كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان لحظة الافتتاح هذه لكي تدعو الفرقاء الاقتصاديين والجماعات المحلية والمؤسسات الداعمة بضرورة الانخراط أكثر في دعم المهرجان، لأنه مكسب لجهة طنجة تطوان الحسيمة وللمسرح المغربي والعربي ولفكرة الجامعة. لقد آن الأوان والجامعة المغربية تضم الفئة الشابة الأكثر عطاء وقدرة وتضحية. آن الأوان لكي تقدم نموذجا احترافيا للمهرجانات التي تجمع بين البحث الأكاديمي والإبداع. وفي هذا الصدد تؤكد كلية الآداب تطوان استعدادها على إعطاء اهتمام أكبر بالتكوين المسرحي والفنون عموما وتوفير الإمكانات المادية واللوجستيكية لتحققه في فضاءات الكلية بشراكة منتجة مع المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة. وإني لآمل أن يستمر هذا التقليد العلمي الجاد الذي يتطلب منا جميعا كامل التشجيع والدعم، وأحيي المشرفين عليه بعامة، وإذ أحيي منظمي المهرجان والمشاركين وشركاء المهرجان وكل من ساهم في إنجاح هذه الدورة كل التوفيق والنجاح، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
Many thanks to Dr. Mustafa Al-Rashid, the Dean of the Faculty of Letters and Humanities in Tétouan. Every year, the International Center for Performance Studies honors some distinguished personalities from different fields. This year, exceptionally, the ICPS is not going to honor one personality, but rather a commission. This commission is Theater and Performing Arts Commission in Saudi Arabia. The commission is the patron of all types of performing arts, namely theater, dance, circus, stand-up comedy, street performances, and the opera. This includes the activation and management of theater houses and performance venues, while encouraging the quality of content, increased production, and the dissemination of performing arts as an essential component of national culture. This commission aims at stimulating the development and growth of the theater and performing arts sector by enabling a diverse ecosystem of Saudi talent to create a content that inspires audiences and sustains careers.
إيمانا من المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة بأهمية ترسيخ ثقافة الاعتراف وتقدير مجهودة الآخر في مختلف المجالات الثقافية والفنية، ودأبا على عادته المحمودة في تكريم إحدى الشخصيات المرموقة في مختلف فنون الفرجة، هذه السنة، واستثناء سيتم تكريم هيئة. ضيف شرف الدورة 17 لمهرجان طنجة الدولي للفنون المشهدية هيئة المسرح والفنون الأدائية بالمملكة العربية السعودية. هيئة تروم تطوير قطاع المسرح والفنون الأدائية على مختلف أنواعها: المسرح، الرقص، عروض السيرك، الكوميديا الارتجالية، عروض الشارع، العروض الحركية، الباليه والأوبرا إلى غير ذلك. وتهدف الهيئة إلى صناعة المحتوى بمعايير الجودة والرفع من عدد الأعمال والعمل على النشر والتوزيع وزيادة الوعي لدى الجمهور والممارسين ورفع إقبال الجمهور على العروض المسرحية والأدائية على مستوى جميع المناطق والشرائح الاجتماعية والفئات العمرية المختلفة. رحبوا معي بضيف شرف الدورة 17 لمهرجان طنجة الدولي للفنون المشهدية هيئة المسرح والفنون الأدائية بالمملكة العربية السعودية، ممثلة في شخص رئيسها التنفيذي الأستاذ سلطان البازغي.
Please join me in welcoming our guest of honor, Professor Sultan Al-Bazi, the CEO of Theatre and Performing Arts Commission in Saudi Arabia.
إذن مرحبا بجميع أعضاء هيئة المسرح والفنون الأدائية. تفضل معي أستاذ، الله يكثر خيرك. إذن تحية خاصة لهيئة الفنون والمسرح والفنون الأدائية. إذن مرحبا بأعضاء هيئة المسرح والفنون الأدائية معنا، وهي خطوة أولى في درب مسار طويل إن شاء الله من التنسيق والتعاون وتطوير المشترك الفني والثقافي بما يتماشى والتوجهات الاستراتيجية لعاهلي البلدين صاحب الجلالة الملك محمد السادس نصره الله وخادم الحرمين الشريفين جلالة الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز. يسلم درع التكريم السيد رئيس جامعة عبد الملك السعدي. إذن هي لحظات تعزز أواصر الأخوة والصداقة وكذلك استثمار المنتوج الثقافي والفني. درع التكريم مهدى من المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة إلى هيئة المسرح والفنون الأدائية بالمملكة العربية السعودية. كذلك باقة ورد هوود يسلمها السيد عميد كلية الآداب بتطوان. خليك معنا دكتور. الصورة باش الصورة تفضل. شكرا سيد رئيس جامعة عبد الملك السعدي، شكرا عميد كلية الآداب أستاذ سلطان البازغي عن الحضور والتكريم. وهيئة المسرح والفنون الأدائية بالمملكة المغربية وأفق اشتغالها وفق خطتها الاستراتيجية 2021-2030. لكم الكلمة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيدات والسادة، أشعر بكثير من السعادة والامتنان لوقوفي أمامكم هذا اليوم ممثلا لهيئة المسرح والفنون الأدائية بالمملكة العربية السعودية. هذه الهيئة الوليدة التي نشأت منطلقة من رؤية واضحة لجعل الثقافة في صلب عملية التنمية، منذ أن صدرت رؤية المملكة 2030 بقيادة أميرنا الشاب ولي العهد الأمير محمد بن سلمان. كانت عنصر الثقافة أحد العناصر الرئيسية في برامج جودة الحياة. ومن هذه الرؤية أنشئت وزارة الثقافة وصدرت الاستراتيجية الوطنية للثقافة. هذه الاستراتيجية أنشأت 11 هيئة متخصصة في قطاعات فرعية، هي تشمل كل 16 قطاعا فرعيا التي اعتمدتها هذه الاستراتيجية. ونعتقد أنه لم يوجد في العالم حتى الآن هذا التخصيص الدقيق للقطاعات، قطاع المسرح، قطاع الموسيقى، قطاع الأفلام، قطاع الأزياء، قطاع الطهي، قطاع للمكتبات، وقطاع للأدب والترجمة والنشر، وإلى آخره من هذه الهيئات التي صدرت. كان القصد منها إعطاء هذه المؤسسات كل التمكين لتطوير هذه القطاعات التي تعمل فيها ولاختزال المسافات. المسرح السعودي كما يعرف أصدقائنا المسرحيون تمتد عمر الممارسة إلى أكثر من 7 عقود، لكن الآن يعني أتتنا الفرصة التاريخية لنعيد رسم المشهد من جديد، نعيد تمكين الفنانين والممارسين، نعيد تمكين أيضا أماكن العرض، إعادة تطوير الأنظمة والقوانين لكي تكون معترفا بها بشكل واضح في كل القطاعات الفرعية. ما الذي سنعمل؟ سأقول لكم بعض العناوين باختصار حتى لا أطيل عليكم. بدأنا في أول مبادرات الهيئة، يعني باستراتيجية الهيئة ضمت عدد كبير من المبادرات، لكن واحدة من أهمها كما نعتقد هي تطوير المسرح المدرسي. سنبدأ هذا العام في بداية العام القادم إن شاء الله مشروعا لتدريب 25,000 معلم ومعلمة ليكون لدينا مشرف نشاط مسرحي في كل مدرسة حكومية. نعمل الآن أيضا على أن تفتتح في العام القادم أول أكاديمية تطبيقية للمسرح والفنون الأدائية بالتعاون مع عدد من الجامعات العالمية الشهيرة في هذا المجال. نعمل أيضا كما ذكر الأصدقاء قبل على تأسيس مؤسسة المسرح الوطني لتكون مؤسسة مستقلة ذات مجلس إدارة مستقل وعمل أيضا مستمر لتكون واحدة من الأذرع لتقديم الإنتاجات الكبرى التي قد لا يقدم عليها القطاع الخاص، لكن في الوقت نفسه أيضا نشجع الفرق المسرحية التي لا زالت تعمل على سبيل الهواية أن ترتقي إلى مرتبة الاحتراف وتسجل فرق مسرحية ثابتة. نعمل أيضا على تطوير القطاع الثالث وتشجيع قيام الجمعيات المتخصصة في المسرح والفنون الأدائية. أول هذه الجمعيات صدر ترخيص للجمعية المهنية للمسرح والفنون الأدائية لتقوم بهذا الدور في رعاية الفنانين بالشكل النقابي المعروف. نعلم أن الوقت أمامنا يعني يراد منه اختصار الزمن بشكل كبير وحرق المراحل بسرعة، لذلك ركزنا على بناء القدرات. هذا العام الدورات التدريبية والورش التدريبية استهدفت الوصول إلى 800 متدرب ومتدربة، وهذا العدد قريب التحقيق قبل نهاية هذا العام بإذن الله. العمل بدون شك كبير، لكنه أيضا ضمن خطة وزارة الثقافة إنشاء 150 بيت ثقافة في أرجاء المملكة. كل بيت ثقافة منها سيكون حول المكتبة العامة ومسرح وقاعات متعددة الأغراض ليكون المسرح في متناول الجميع في كل مكان من مناطق المملكة ومحافظاتها المختلفة. هذا الطموح الكبير لا شك أنه ينبع من هذه الرؤية القيادية الشابة التي وضعتنا أمام في هذا المسار السريع لوضع الفنون والثقافة السعودية في مسارها الصحيح، ونستطيع أن نخاطب العالم بها أيضا. نريد أن نتمكن من رواية حكايتنا على مسارح العالم في كل مكان. أشكر لكم استماعكم وأشكر لكم إعطائي هذه الفرصة للتشريف بالوقوف أمامكم والتكريم. شكرا لكم جميعا.
شكرا السلطان زي الرئيس التنفيذي لهيئة المسرح والأدائية بالمملكة العربية السعودية. إذن بالموازاة مع الندوات العلمية ولماستر كلاس وتوقيعات الكتب، سنعيش على امتداد 4 أيام مع مسرحيات ما بين حلم الهجرة وعتمة الحاوية وضياع الهوية وويلات الحروب. تبخرت أحلام ربيعة وشانا وطاليا، ضاع الأمل بالنسبة إليهن، وتحققت الفرجة في تشاتارا بالنسبة لنا. وانطلاقا من موسيقى الراب للكاتب والمغني توباك شاكور سنتابع أحداث مقتل بريندا وقصة مجابهة استغلال الأطفال، لنعيش لحظات في بحر التناقض والتضاد، الموت والتعلق بفن العيطة، من خلال رواية رضا الميت عبر جنازة رجل. لنختم عروضنا المسرحية بعدم، حكايات منطلقها الشعري تسائل الوجود الإنساني في ماهيته وجوهره. كانت تلكم ملخصات وعناوين العروض المسرحية المقترحة للفرجات العمومية خلال الدورة 17. وبالموازاة تم تنظيم معرضين، معرض بعنوان مشهديات فوتوغرافية للمبدع والمتألق عبد العزيز الخليلي. عبد العزيز الخليلي كما يلقب على مواقع التواصل بعين طنجة المشهدية، على امتداد مسار طويل وثق للمشهدية لحظة بلحظة، إطار بوزارة الشباب والرياضة، والكاتب العام للمركز الدولي لدراسة الفرجة. هنيئا سي عبد العزيز بالمنجز، ونتمنى التوفيق ومزيد من التألق. ندعو فنان آخر. زربان خليك ماشي، دابا خصو غير باش يمشي باش يصور. فنان آخر تألق معنا كذلك وسمى معرضه ذاكرة طنجة المشهدية بتقنية الكولاج، الأستاذ مراد بن كيران. تفضل يا سي مراد. الأستاذ الدكتور مراد بن كيران من محبي المركز الدولي لدراسة الفرجة، وكذلك نائب رئيس جامعة نيو إنجلاند. أقف بين قامتين فنيتين للضوء، أقف بين قامتين فنيتين، أتمنى أن تستمتعوا بمنتوجهم الأنيق والجميل جدا. شكرا سي مراد، شكرا سي خليلي، دام لكم التألق. العفو. ولا يسعنا في هذا المقام الطيب بحضوركم إلا أن نشكر بكثير من الامتنان والتقدير وزارة الشباب والثقافة والتواصل، ولاية جهة طنجة تطوان الحسيمة، رئاسة جامعة عبد الملك السعدي، كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان، مجلس جهة طنجة تطوان الحسيمة، مجلس مدينة طنجة، المديرية الجهوي لوزارة الشباب والثقافة والتواصل قطاع الشباب بجهة طنجة تطوان الحسيمة، المسرح الوطني محمد الخامس، المعهد الدولي لتناسج ثقافات الفرجة، جامعة نيو إنجلاند، السيدات والسادة الأكاديميون والأساتذة الباحثون والفنانون من المملكة المغربية الشريفة وباقي الدول الشقيقة والصديقة، ممثلو المنابر الإعلامية، أعضاء فرقة البحث في المسرح ودراسات الفرجة بجامعة عبد الملك السعدي، أعضاء المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة، وأصدقاء المركز الأوفياء، ووفاء للقيم التي اخترناها جميعا، وعرفانا بما بصم عليه أصدقاؤنا الذين غادروا دنيانا، سواء على مستوى الإعداد للمهرجان أو على مستوى المساهمة العلمية. نستحضر الأستاذ حسن المنيعي، محمد الحارثي، كارول مالت، ليزلي طابلين، عبد الرزاق الصغير، جمال الدين العبرق وآخرون رحمة الله عليهم. إذن سيداتي وسادتي، حضرات السيدات والسادة، دمتم ودم وفاؤكم لعروس الأسرار في مهرجانها الدولي للفنون المشهدية. ندعوكم لحفل شين على شرفكم. مرحبا بكم وطاب مقامكم خلال الدورة 17. شكرا لحضوركم.
Okay, my name is Erika Fischer-Lichte. I'm professor at the Freie Universität Berlin and director of the International Research Center Interweaving Performance Cultures.
My name is Naomi Boyce, and I'm a student assistant at Interweaving Performance Cultures, and I've been working here since 2018.
My name is Omid Soltani. I'm a research associate at the International Research Center, and I'm part of the team working on the Handbook project.
My name is Thorsten Joost. I work here at the Research Center as a researcher for now, I think more than 10 years. And I've been very much involved in this handbook project as one of the co-editors.
The idea was not at the beginning of our colleague. It came up in the discussions with the fellows. Every now and then someone said, well, I can't use here the English term because it is not a good translation to my Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Maori, whatever you name it, term. I must introduce that one.
And so the idea of this handbook is really to foster something like an interlingual writing style, right? That thrives through translation and explanation, and to not assume and somehow critique the assumption that there is a universality to the English language.
And on the long run, it turned out that within one language, the different concepts related to theater and performance form something which we could call an epistemic system. And so we thought it might be a great idea to compile a handbook.
And it's called the Handbook on Performance-Related Concepts in Non-European Languages.
The way we proceeded was that we arranged a workshop for each language that took 1 or 2, mostly 2 days.
And our aim during these workshops will be to determine the 10 most important concepts that would be of interest and should be included in the handbook as key concepts related to performance in this language.
Of course, knowing first we cannot cover all languages that might be there. Second, we cannot refer to all the concepts that are there in the languages.
So I think it is important to know that these workshops were organized in a spirit that has something to do with our center and the idea of interweaving from the start.
So Okay, my name is Erika Fischer-Lichte. I'm professor at the Freie Universität Berlin and director of the International Research Center Interweaving Performance Cultures.
My name is Naomi Boyce, and I'm a student assistant at Interweaving Performance Cultures, and I've been working here since 2018.
My name is Omid Soltani. I'm a research associate at the International Research Center, and I'm part of the team working on the Handbook project.
My name is Thorsten Joost. I work here at the Research Center as a researcher for now, I think more than 10 years. And I've been very much involved in this handbook project as one of the co-editors.
The idea was not at the beginning of our colleague. It came up in the discussions with the fellows. Every now and then someone said, well, I can't use here the English term because it is not a good translation to my Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Maori, whatever you name it, term. I must introduce that one.
And so the idea of this handbook is really to foster something like an interlingual writing style, right? That thrives through translation and explanation, and to not assume and somehow critique the assumption that there is a universality to the English language.
And on the long run, it turned out that within one language, the different concepts related to theater and performance form something which we could call an epistemic system. And so we thought it might be a great idea to compile a handbook.
And it's called the Handbook on Performance-Related Concepts in Non-European Languages.
The way we proceeded was that we arranged a workshop for each language that took 1 or 2, mostly 2 days.
And our aim during these workshops will be to determine the 10 most important concepts that would be of interest and should be included in the handbook as key concepts related to performance in this language.
Of course, knowing first we cannot cover all languages that might be there. Second, we cannot refer to all the concepts that are there in the languages.
So I think it is important to know that these workshops were organized in a spirit that has something to do with our center and the idea of interweaving from the start.
So we did it in a, let's put it, a very practical way. We relied on the fellows we had in our colleague and on their knowledge and what they could provide.
So in these workshops, we try to have a wide range of people that are involved, always.
We invited theater scholars, theater practitioners, linguists, and partly also philosophers of language.
We thought it would be really interesting to mix the participants in terms of people who are working in theater and performance studies in the respective context and country. On the other hand, we thought it would be really interesting to have people who work outside of performance studies or even academia, artists really, who can contribute from their perspective of practicing artists and tell us, so in rehearsal processes, which are the terms that you encounter the most? And so that they could say, well, this is a term that might be really interesting in academic context, but we are never using it during rehearsal processes, or I never encountered this concept in reviews, for example. And because we were aiming for about 10 participants in these workshops,
who in advance were asked to make a list of what, from their point of view, would be the 10 most important concepts if they talk about theater and performance.
we sometimes ended up with a list of 70, 80 key concepts that all the participants thought should be included.
And with that material then, we began each workshop. And there we discussed then.
And that was always very exciting, always very funny too, and sometimes highly controversial between those participants. But we, in the end of 3 days, we always ended up with a list of 10 terms.
And this is the way we came to the 10 concepts that are always included.
We'll have a longer introduction, general introduction, authored by Erika Fischer-Lichte. And in this longer introduction, she will address the aims of this book, the general aims and purpose this handbook has. And then there will be several handbook sections.
Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. Then there is Arabic, and there is
Yoruba and Indian languages. And there will be a conclusion, an outlook, actually, more than a conclusion, it will be an outlook that addresses Maori concepts. And each of these sections has a similar order. There will be an introduction, a long introductory essay to each language section. And the purpose of this introductory essay is to explain the selection that will follow, why these 10 terms and not different ones, and also the aims of these general introductions is to sketch a history of terms, of an epistemic systems, you know, these terms build, and to explain how this landscape of interlinked concepts formed and why. And this is very different in each of these sections.
My name is Khalid Amin. I'm a professor of performance studies at Abd Malik Saadi University, and also the president of the International Center for Performance Studies in Tangier. So yeah, my work in the handbook, you know, performance-related concepts, I mean, the section of Arabic consists of contributing, first of all, a general introduction, and then I think 4 entries. One, it's related to Forja, the other one about Halqa, the other one about Hakawati, I think, and a third one maybe about Jesed with other partners. The intention behind it, you know, just to follow up with what Professor Erika Fischer-Lichte was saying. I think here, this project was extremely important because it's premised first, you know, on like 3 major, I would say, things. The first one, it's the possibility of achieving, let's say, a democratic interweaving across worldwide performance cultures, you know, and given the fact that each one has very specific, you know, concepts, and even while receiving other concepts from, let's say, the, you know, the European theater or European tradition, etc., the mobility of these concepts, you know, had been affected actually by, you know, the local usage. So we can speak here about untranslatability as a factor that informs but also deforms, you know, the consistency of how the concept is used in this culture and in that culture. Yeah, that's number one. Premise number 2,
is, really a kind of collaborative rethinking of the intercultural paradigm and its configuration of the other on the outside. And of course, here we are speaking about a rethinking that is founded on reciprocity as well as vision, as a vision, and also, a negotiation of power knowledge. So, and the third promise is maybe a kind of invitation to practice a double critique as a way of saying and doing. The major concern of this project, as I see it myself, is really a kind of, let's say, going forward, at least to explore certain, epistemic differences between, let's say, East and West, and North and South, but not geographically, but also as, the global South as an epistemology as well. Let me go back to the workshop. During the workshop on performance-related concepts, mainly the Arabic version, prominent scholars from different parts of the Arab world, they were invited, to the workshop. And of course, they were invited also to put on the table, at least 5 concepts. So we had Lina Majdalani, we had Nora Amin, we had Rabi Amroui, Edward Zeiter, Marvin Carlson, Shamsuddin from Sudan. Anyway, it's a diversity from, the Middle East, North Africa, but as well as from Sudan and other parts. And each one of us is supposed to write an entry on that concept. And definitely, when you choose a concept, that means you are the one who should be writing about it. And of course, in the introduction, I had to speak about the difficulty of speaking, like Arabic concepts in relation to, other concepts that are worldwide used definitely. So starting with performance, for example, as an Anglo-American concept, and that the mobility of this concept is very much, posing serious problems, not only while being translated into Arabic, but also into French, into German, I'm sure, into other languages. So what does it mean, performance? Is it to perform? Is it, a twice behaved behavior? Is it a spectacle, etc.? So in Arabic, it's even worse because, we have a linguistic diglossia and diversity from the Middle East, North Africa, and the Maghreb. So I'm based in Morocco, and definitely our use of the concept, of forja, for example, is completely different from how it is resonated, or resonating in the Middle East. And here we have really to dig into the archaeology of how it has been deployed, and of course go back to the dictionary, etc. It's exactly like the rasa, or rasa in the Indian language, and its relation to catharsis. It's not 100%, catharsis as an emotional discharge, but it's more than that. And of course, it cannot be simply translated as catharsis. It's the same with performance. It cannot simply render it in one specific word and say ada or forja. But we really need to think twice, particularly when it comes to deriving other terminology out of it. When we read Fischer Lichter's transformative power of performance, we have, performativity and performatives. And so these derivatives are quite difficult to underpin when it comes to, deciding whether I will use ada or forja. So when going back to the dictionary, of course, we have كشاف الغم ومشاهدة ما يتسلى به. And this is a very clear indication that the Arabs, at least in the past, they used to have something like catharsis and related to forja, etc. But unfortunately, we can speak about, the lack, let's say, of an Arabic translation, actually, of tragedy and comedy in the Arabic language up till the mid-19th century. So we have serious problems related to how, for example, Averroes mistranslated tragedy and comedy as al-madh wal-hija, which are completely separate genre, etc. But of course, there are people who are speaking about mistranslation, but I would prefer to talk about the impossibility of translation in this process. But at least they should explain it. That's exactly the case of Forja. Speaking about Forja, I really need to explain it rather than to put it as simply performance, because performance is a very complex and very broad term. It's a performance of an engine of a car, but also it's a performance of something artistic, etc. But of course, when you derive from it performative and performativity, as I said, then we have serious problems. So al-ada equals, doing in Arabic, but a forja, it's really about seeing, watching a performance. And of course, when going back to the roots of Arabic and say how in mid-19th century, for example, they choose to speak about marzah and then masrah and then masrah at the end. So masrah, it's really the space, the theater, it's the space where the action is taking place, but also when you connect it with the theatron for the Greeks, it's really where it's the place where the audience are watching. So Forja is much more related to that. Forja is much more related to, something to be seen by an audience. Whereas Ada, it's something to be enacted on stage or in a performance space. So there are quite radical changes, in meaning. But of course, they are used, unfortunately, interchangeably in the Arab world. And in the Middle East, they prefer Ada for performance. And in the Maghreb, particularly in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, they prefer Forja. Forja, it's, I would say, it's one of the contested terms and concepts in the workshop of Arabic, but also in the Arab world. Why? Because of this understanding in the Middle East. It's very much connected to popular performances, traditional performances, folklores, and stuff like that. Whereas in the Maghreb, we are thinking of it much more as an umbrella term that can be developed within a broad spectrum of performance and performance studies.
The jobs of us here at the center was really more as moderators.
We would be between the author, our editor here, and the language editor there.
We're also reading through the texts in a way as first readers of the text and giving feedback.
We were always giving feedback and saying, we have no idea, maybe this context should be explained a bit more. Maybe you can give a short explanation of the term you're using to describe the other term, and feedback like this. And then our job transformed into editing work.
Well, we receive manuscripts from the authors who have worked on different terms in different languages, and we format them, set them to the correct style based on our style sheet that we have developed here at the center specifically for the handbook project. It would go through various proofreaders and editors who are in constant contact with the authors themselves.
And together with the other students working on the book, we are working on all the bibliographical information. We're working on formatting the text according to the Chicago style.
The publisher had asked us to use the Chicago Manual of Style, but as a roadmap, Chicago Manual is very helpful. But concerning the project that we needed to work on, we found that there are some limitations for non-English languages and the material that was coming from those sources. But it was easy enough to adapt our needs to the structure that Chicago Manual would provide and tweak those limitations in a way that it would create opportunities for us to be more clear in our expressions.
I mean, there are questions in terms of like in Chicago and in many relevant publications, for example, only when in the bibliography, you'll have the last name of the author and then the first initial of their name. And we've decided that, especially for certain languages where authors share the same last name, it's helpful to have the incomplete first name as well, which is then going back and deciding, okay, we're going to have the full first name for every single author in the entire book.
The writing system is different, the typography is different, but they can both support each other to produce a synthesized text that can be accessible not only to the English speakers, but also people from those original cultures whose terminology is being defined for a English-speaking audience or reader.
And of course, these are small details, but there are details that are important in terms of how we introduce these authors and introduce these discourses on these terms from different regions of the world.
On the surface of it, it looked like preparing a handbook consisting of different languages, all in English and according to an American English style sheet would be paradoxical. But as we went further, we realized that we didn't need to just focus on the limitations that it brings, but it would bring opportunities for blending these languages in a way that it would benefit both sides.
And then, of course, with each new section that we work on, we began with Yoruba, and then we moved on to China and Japan, and of course, we go back and forth a bit, and we're ending with India, more or less. It means that new questions come up each time and new challenges in terms of how we format certain things, how we want to cite foreign language publications. And then that means that when we reach new challenges or figure out new questions in terms of the editing process, we have to go back and look at what we've done previously. So that means, yeah, as I said before, it means we're going through each text many, many times.
What was really helpful is that even with the Chicago Manual, the main requirement is to be consistent rather than be strict. So we had this chance to try different things and see what looks practically on the page when it is printed out. Is it readable enough? Does it keep both sides relevant and happy and on an equal standing or not?
If Yoruba would be the language that is read everywhere, or Chinese, let's put it like that, it would be published in Chinese. But the fact is, we all have to adapt to English.
You know, it's like when speaking about the post-colonial paradigm and post-colonial writings, most of them, you know, are written in English. And of course, there are these subalterns, they were given voice, you know, in the West. So we have to rethink again, you know, our, I would say, relation with this West, because the West is not one unified, you know, homogeneous, but it's heterogeneous. And we have to think also about, you know, writing in English and using English as a lingua franca doesn't mean that we are, you know, completely subordinated within, you know, the Eurocentric paradigm, etc.
One should emphasize that this handbook is not written only in English. Actually, it's written in many languages, or many languages have been woven into this English text.
The point is, it has nothing to do with whether something is German or English or whatsoever. Here, there are concepts from non-European languages which are not so well known all over the world, and they should spread. People should read what there is, and therefore we have to choose English.
So we have conscious use when we work with English, and be aware that not everything can be thought, not everything can be said in this language, that we have a plurality of languages that offer different opportunities for thinking and doing and feeling and writing, and that the most exciting thing would be to learn to combine this in a sensible and readable and understandable way.
And that it is published by Routledge, for instance, that gives us the possibility to let it spread so that these voices are heard, can be heard all over the world.
So publishing in Routledge, I would say that this will give us, much more visibility, and of course, giving a voice to other performance cultures. And definitely, I don't find it as something very negative, and absolutely not, because we've been publishing, for example, in Morocco, more than 70, books in the center, the International Center for Performance Studies. Most of them are in Arabic, but we have serious difficulties in reaching out even, performance scholars in the Arab world. And why is that? Simply because we need a whole armada, to spread, this, all over the Arab world.
The important thing is not where it appears, but what appears in it. And there are always the people speaking from their own culture, and not we.
Given me tools to think about performance in new ways, and certainly just simply terms to talk about it in new ways, which isn't to say that they particularly or always should be applied to Western performance, or that I'm using them actively in the way I speak about Western performances that I write about, but it makes me understand performances in these regions at a much deeper level that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to.
This handbook is trying to communicate that there could be gaps in knowledge that we might not be even aware of, but they only are made visible when we interact with each other from different cultures and understandings that we might not have of our own performance culture or culture at large. It's only in the encounters between cultures that gaps are made visible and can be addressed.
The major concern of this project, as I see it myself, is really a kind of, let's say, going forward, at least to explore certain, epistemic differences between, let's say, East and West, and North and South, but not geographically, but also as, the global South as an epistemology as well.
And I understand our handbook project as an exercise in this interlingual, interepistemic research and writing.
Yeah, of course, you can't incorporate the whole diversity of the word, in one book, but definitely the book provides a framework and a format, that is quite inclusive, and of course it can be very much influential in the future, for other scholars and for other performance traditions to, to write about their own proper, I would say, theater concepts.
Well, this is, as I said, this is a beginning, and it had to do with what kind of people we had here and with whom we could cooperate. Except these 6 languages, there will also be one contribution on Maori, which is a very different language, by which we just wanted to show we would like to extend, but that's not possible here. So I would just advise people from other cultures to start such kind, first for their own language, to do such an idea. What theater concepts do they have? First to bring them together and then discuss what kind of an epistemic system do they form. I mean, our center cannot do that for the whole world. We had to rely on the people we had here and with whom we could cooperate. But I think it would be kind of a springboard maybe when people from cultures who are not included read it, that they say, oh, look, what's in our language? Let's go and make something for our own language. I think then this handbook would have done a very good job.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can have Astrid with us. Khalid. Astrid and Erika Fischer, if possible. We still have like 10 minutes exact to go to the next panel with Richard Schechner. Hello again. So how are you, Erika?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. It was funny to see now the whole thing, how it is cut and done with, but I think it's fine.
So maybe one last word about the project of Arabic theater concepts being translated into English. Yes?
Astrid.
Hello, Astrid. Can you hear us?
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Very good. So it's very good to hear from you. By the way, you know, in the video, your voice is sort of absent, at least in this half an hour. But definitely, I know that you've been investing a great deal, you know, a lot of energy in the project. Would you say more, I mean, few words about the Arabic section of the book, particularly?
Well, thank you for your kind words. But actually, I have to give that compliment back because we, the editors, Professor Fischer-Lichte, Thorsten Joos, and I, we were just the initiators of the project. And we're giving the platform, the facility, the infrastructure as good as we could. And I think the center is one of the few places in the world that could launch this project. But really, the main participants of this project were our authors. It was you, dear Khalid. Without you, really, it would have not been possible. You've showed so much engagement, knowledge, expertise, work, consistency over the past years, and all the other authors involved, that without all of you, the project is not possible. And I don't say it just like that, because it's true. We are not expert on performance cultures in the Arabic language. We are not. We know nothing. We only knew a little bit what you and your colleagues told us. And so we rely on all of your expertise. It was, I have to say, a very enriching project also personally for me, and I think for the other two as well, to learn so much and to be able to learn so much from all of you, and to be able to ask questions that might seem very, very basic and silly sometimes to you, because we don't know so much about it. And you were always, all of you, so open and friendly to answer those questions. And so this project has been an amazing journey. And I don't think if anything like it existed before. And I'm very, very excited that we could make it happen and have it with us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And also thank you for the energy and the investment. Yes, maybe if Erika is still with us, if we think about the whole project, I mean, Swahili, Chinese, Indian, and also Arabic, etc. What are the future prospects for what are the next steps, so to speak?
Well, the next step our center cannot do, because we will finish by the end of July. So we can hope that until that point, the book will be ready and we can make a public presentation of it. But we do very much hope that other people who see this book and use it, that, as Astrid said already, that they feel that it would be a very good thing to do something for their own concepts as well. And I think really they must not do it for, I do not know how many languages, but if each of these languages would do such an encyclopedia for their own performance-related concepts, it would be fantastic, I think. It's fantastic. We learned also a lot about our own concepts and how they relate to each other when we worked on that. Because usually we always use these words and terms and concepts and do not think much about how they relate among each others. And I think this would be a good opportunity in each culture to see what a very particular epistemic system is formed by these concepts that they have in their own language.
Thank you so much, Professor Erika Fischer-Lichte. And definitely, you know, while you were speaking, I was thinking also about the concept of performance and the way it traveled, you know, from English to German, French and Arabic and other languages. And definitely this mobility is creating a kind of, you know, instability, I would say, in the concept itself, the way it is framed, maybe because of the lack of translatability, or maybe because it's very difficult for a performance paradigm, say, you know, Moroccan or let's say Nigerian, etc., to accept, you know, a kind of concept that is somehow, you know, foreign. But you know, when we translate it, we definitely inform it, or at least the translation is being informed and deformed sometimes by other, you know, aspects that are somehow located in the borderline. I mean, in this zone of friction most of the time. So yeah, the concept of performance, as I said, when it traveled all over and came to Morocco, for example, and to the Arab world. So yeah, we use it differently. We use forja in the Maghreb, and they use ada in the Middle East. So, and between forja and ada, there is a whole gap, definitely, that we can make, you know, I mean, we can talk about differences and you know, dissimilarities much more than you know, similarities. So once again, it has been a great pleasure, you know, to have you among us in this panel, speaking about the you know, the theater concepts and the way, the mobility and the way they travel across cultures. And of course, this is the project and the book project that you are editing, and of course for Routledge, it's one of, I would say, one of the exemplary projects that can be really, you know, be thought of as one of the possibilities for real interweaving between cultures. And of course, our deployment and use of English is not really that it's dominant or hegemonic language, but much more we think of it as a lingua franca, a language that connects us, and we can, of course, speak our own languages within that English. So we speak Arabic into English as you speak German in English.
Yeah. So it is.
Thank you very much, Erika. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we still have like 2 minutes to invite our distinguished guest, Richard Schechner, for the next panel. And of course, this will be a master class. And okay, so excuse us for this little interruption. So I'm asking Khalid, here you go. Richard, so it's such an honor for the International Center of Performance Studies to receive
a household name in performance studies.
In my household.
Our honorable guest is none other than Richard Schechner. As one of the founders of performance studies, Schechner brushes his work in performance theory with innovative approaches, which he then applies to an ever wider spectrum of performances, including theater, play, rituals, dance, music, popular entertainments, sports, politics, performance in everyday life, to name but a few, in order for him to come to terms with performative behavior, not just as an object worthy of study, but also as an active artistic intellectual practice. Beside his academic duties, of course, at the university, as a university professor of performance studies, Schechner is also a theater director, a prolific author, and the editor of the most famous journal in the field, Drama Review, or TDR, and also the Enactment book series. As an academic, of course, his areas of research include, but not limited to, performance theory, experimental performance, Asian performance, intercultural performance, ritual play and performance, theories of directing, broad spectrum of performance and performance studies, globalization and performance, and of course, performance in everyday life. So of course, as a theater director also, he directed many productions, including, the very famous Dionysus in 69, and of course, Macbeth, Hamlet, Mother Carriage and Her Children, The Balcony, Three Sisters. Schechner has also directed in Asia and Africa, and as a writer, he authored numerous books on a myriad of topics. So you can imagine: Public Domain in 68, Environmental Theater in 73, Theater, Spaces and Environments in 75, Essays on Performance Theories 76, The End of Humanism in 81, From Ramlila and to the Avant-Garde, that's in 83, Between Theater and Anthropology in 85, to Performance Theory, which is also revised in 88, Performance Studies and Introduction in 2002, and that's the only book, by the way, that has been translated into Arabic so far. It should be noted also that as of 2018, his books have been translated into 18 languages, including Arabic. So he's recipient of many distinguished awards and fellowships, and it's indeed an immense honor for Performing Tangier to be hosting a scholar of the, I would say, the pedigree of Richard Schechner. We hope our audience will seize this golden opportunity to enjoy him, and of course, above all, to learn from his expertise and engage dialogically and dialectically with his insights. Maybe we have like 3 parts. Maybe the first part will be, we can start with the broad spectrum approach of performance studies and how you, Richard, you see the way it has traveled across languages and cultures. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, Khalid, thank you for hosting me. I'm very sorry, friends, that I'm not there in Tangier with you. Hopefully in a future time, I will be able to be there. It's great to see Erica. It's great to see some other people I know. And, I'm addressing, I think, 2 audiences. The close-in audience of performance theorists probably will know everything I'm about to say. And the broader audience, I hope there is a broader audience on YouTube or wherever, maybe some of that will be a little bit different. In the interest of being compact, I'm going to read a few pages because then I won't wander off. I know we don't have that much time. And I would like to have the opportunity to have the people who are participating interrogate me, engage me. I would engage you in some kind of dialogue rather than, just talking. And listening to what has just happened, the panel on English as a hegemonic language. Yes, that I have a lot to say about that. Let's say post-colonialism and the inheritance of colonialism are something that we are going to be living with for a long time. And if English can become a lingua franca, a kind of Latin, that would be excellent. However, I yearn for the time where we can speak each other's languages, when given that great fairy tale wish, what do you wish for? Aside from the meta wish of wishing for all my wishes to come true, if I specify them, my wish would be to speak all the world's languages. That would be as close as one can get to a kind of, pre-Babylonian world. However, performances are or can be models of utopian societies. The process of making performances, collaborative interactions and collective decisions leading to public displays is a positive social model. Workshops are ways to destroy ignorance. Rehearsals are ways to creatively relate to others, not by submerging or ignoring differences, but by exploring differences as the group devises a common way forward. And performances offer to the public the outcome of such active research. And I emphasize that the basic performance studies model is of a process. It is the process of research or workshop, the process of repetition towards a goal or rehearsals, and the process of displaying or sharing the results of the two earlier processes, which then feed back into future performances. Performance studies, the academic field I have helped to create and develop, is based on the axiom that we live in a performatized world where cultures are colliding with each other, hybridizing at a swift and increasing rate. And the prior panel shows that. This is a kind of hybrid language that is developing, means of using a certain semantic, perhaps English, but to incorporate into that semantic ways of thinking that are not native to English. English itself is a composite language of Anglo-Saxon, French, Celtic, etc., and so forth. All languages are hybrids, actually. These collisions are not always politically correct or pleasant, the ones among cultures. Populations and ideas are on the move, pushed by war, disease, as we know with COVID, ideologies, religions, famines, and hopes for a better life, government intervention, and global trade. These kind of collisions will only increase in the future. Whether we survive global warming is not really the question. The question is what and how we will be in the consequences of global warming. To what degree will there be, massive walls erected around the Mediterranean to stop all crossings from Africa, along the Rio Grande to stop all crossings from Latin America into the first world, as it were, from the fourth world or third world. And we will either survive with some degree of humanity, or we will enter a very devolved period. And human culture has had long stretches of devolvement as well as evolution. We shouldn't think of evolution as a one-way street. The so-called European Middle Ages had a lot of glorious things, but they had a lot of terrible things going on as well. And similar periods can be found throughout Asia, Africa, and so on. So it's not a given that we will come out on the bright side of this, nor is it a given that we'll come out on the catastrophic side. It's still up in the air, though the recent meetings at CAP, whatever number it was, 21, 25, are not too encouraging, because the interests of business, the interests of government. The interest of business is profit. The interest of government is self-survival. These two interests clash with the interest of most people, which is some way to at first really acknowledge and secondly take actual steps to mitigate what's coming at us. The COVID pandemic is a kind of dress rehearsal for what's to come. And it's not, as a theater director, I'm not overly hopeful about how we've handled this dress rehearsal. At any rate, the outcome of all these things, if there is an outcome instead of many, of all this circulation is neither clear nor certain. As I said, my head is a pessimist. My stomach, my gut is an optimist. Performances in the broad sense, in social life, in the arts, politics, business, medicine, science, and popular culture, mark identities, bend and remake time, adorn and reshape the body, tell stories, and provide peoples with the means to play with, rehearse, and remake the worlds we not merely inhabit, but are always already in the process of reconstructing. The development of performance as a category of theory, as well as a fact of behavior and action, makes it increasingly difficult to sustain the distinctions between appearance and facts, surfaces and depths, illusions and substances. We're seeing that today, and I can't give a second lecture, but it's a crisis of epistemology. In other words, how do we know what we know, and do we know what we know? For eons, people have believed in fictions, whether it's the fiction of a god like Jesus rising after 3 days, or the fiction of another god, Rama, incarnating himself every year as Ram Lila, or it's a much more minor fiction of Donald Trump saying he won the election. What's happened is that the categories of these fictions, which since the age of rationalism in the European Renaissance and 18th century, 17th, 18th century, there was a kind of ability to keep the fictions in the realm of art and religion. But now the fictions have become infiltrated entirely also the realms of politics. They were always lurking there, but they didn't have such purchase as they do now. So in a certain way, I don't feel personally responsible, but I think the theories of performance studies help engender the theories of postmodernism, this crisis of epistemology. How do you maintain a world where we don't have values given to us by divine will, and we don't have values given to us by Newtonian physics, quantum physics, and indeterminacy very much undermine the notion of inalienable values or truths. So that's a whole other discussion. Maybe we'll have it if we have time. The epistemological crisis that I think we're facing, along with the ecological crisis. So this, it's increasingly difficult to sustain distinctions between appearances and facts, surfaces and depths, illusions and substances. More than that, appearances are actualities. Appearances do drive actions. In modernity, what was behind, beneath, deep, and hidden were often the most real, but in postmodernity and whatever will come after, and I think we're now in the middle of this coming after, this epistemological crisis period, the Anthropocene and so on, whatever comes after, the relationship between the depths and the surfaces is fluid and dynamically convective. What was hidden is tossed upwards. What was skim is plunged into the interior. And it's not that even the notion of fake news suggests there's real news. In a certain sense, all news is fake news. All news is real news. And it's very, very hard to agree on the value system to guide our actions based on certain realities. Now, to understand the social consequences of the performance studies way of thinking, I want to turn to Jawaharlal Nehru, who in 1955, that's like 100 and X years ago, 75 years ago, in Bandung, Indonesia, told representatives of what came to be called the Third World, and now I'm quoting Nehru. I speak with the greatest respect of these great powers. He meant the USA and the USSR, because they are not only great in military might, but in development. I mean, that's what you were saying in the previous panel. So listen to Nehru here. Great not only in military might, but in development, in culture, in civilization. But I do submit that greatness sometimes brings false values, false standards. I submit that moral force counts, and the moral force of Asia and Africa must, in spite of the atomic and hydrogen bombs of Russia, the USA, or another country, they must count. Therefore are we, the countries of Asia and Africa, and he didn't see, but he could have talked about the global South in the New World, Latin America, and he could have talked about the Pacific Islands as well. So when he says Asia and Africa, he means all but the hegemonic West. The countries of Asia and Africa devoid of any positive position except being pro-communist or anti-communist, ? Has it come to this, Nehru says, that the leaders of thought who have given religions and all kinds of things to the world have to tag on to this kind of group or that and be hangers-on of this party or the other, carrying out their wishes and occasionally giving an idea? It is most degrading and humiliating to any self-respecting people or nation, unquote. This was Nehru in 1955. And it was the origin of the notion of the third world as a counterpart to what was then a bipolar world. Today, the world is not bipolar as it was in Nehru's day. It is triangular, with tensions arising from conflicts among the claims of ideologized religion, 1, militarized politics, 2, and globalized economies, 3. Note, I'm not saying China and the US. I'm not giving it a geopolitical basis as such. I'm talking about ideologized religion, whether it's Hindutva in India or certain kinds of jihad in the radical Arab world, or American racism, which is founded on a certain misinterpretation of Christianity, ideologized religion, militarized politics, as we see in Europe and elsewhere, the strength of force. We see it in Myanmar. We see it already all over, militarized politics and globalized economies. And at that level, the United States and China and the European Union are doing a dance together with a apparent conflict, but at a certain global level, a great deal of collaboration. These forces overlap even as they are often in competition or apparent competition with each other. Paradoxically, they are mutually dependent even as they are antagonistic. That is, they are mutually dependent, ideologized religion, militarized politics, and globalized economy. Against this world, in the spirit of Nehru, I propose a fourth world, a world of aesthetics. I propose that we make aesthetics a counterweight to religion, politics, and business along the lines of Nehru's moral force. Nehru's third world had a specific geographical location, the global South. Today's fourth world is a proportion of people everywhere with a majority nowhere, nowhere. I dare say probably that's as true in Morocco as it is in the United States, as it is in Germany, wherever. It is also part of every person, this fourth world, that part which rejects absolutism, deadly force, and for lack of a better term, ugliness. So this world of aesthetics I'm proposing, ugliness in the broadest sense of ugliness, whether ugliness of form or of purpose. What unites the new fourth world is a community of purpose, a mode of inquiry, the experimental and the avant-garde, if you will. The fourth world is at present incipient, not fully realized, seeds not yet wholly grown. This fourth world of aesthetics needs to organize itself as, quote, non-aligned, neither capitalist, whether of the US, European, or Chinese brand of capitalism, nor communist socialist, nor fundamentalist religious whether Islamic, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, or whatever. The vanguard of this new fourth world are, and here I hope you won't think me too arrogant, performance theorists and performance artists who practice playing deeply as a way of finding and embodying new knowledge. Now, if I were to write a manifesto for this fourth world of performance, it would have 4 axioms. 1, to perform is to explore, to play, to experiment with new relationships. 2, to perform is to cross borders. These borders are not only geographical, but emotional, ideological, political, and personal. 3, to perform is to engage in lifelong active study, to grasp every possibility as a script, something to be played with, interpreted, reformed, remade. And 4, to perform is to become someone else and yourself at the same time. That is, to empathize, react, grow, and change. I realize that what I am proposing is almost unimaginable because it is so hard for people to take seriously those who are not doing business or not making war or not enforcing the will of God. But we must take seriously those who play, those who create playgrounds, those who create art spaces. We must take seriously the personal, social, and world-making force of performance. And I think that this conference, Khalid, that you and your colleagues have convened is an example of what I'm talking about. So that's my answer to your question about the broad spectrum, and as well this notion of the fourth world of performance. So ball's in your court.
Thank you so much, Richard. Yeah, it's so intense as always. My thinking about the third word of performance studies, you know,
I've changed it now. It has to be the fourth world.
Yeah, when I read the script, you know, written 3 years ago, as you told me, can we be the new third word? You know, it was so powerful, I must say. But now, definitely, I can see that, you know, it's closely related to, you know, the theorizing from the global south. So maybe, you know, I quote from, you know, the first script, you know, written 3 years ago, in, I think, page 22, you said, today, artists, activists, and scholars are the new third word. Nero's, you know, third word had a specific geographical location. Today's new third word is a proportion of people present everywhere with the majority nowhere. What unites the new third word is a community of purpose, and definitely, and a mode, I would add to that, a mode of becoming in Deleuzian terms. So I think here we are really speaking into the heart of what we are debating today, which is the global south. So we are thinking about the south, not really as a geographical location, but very much as, you know, I would say an option, a decolonial option maybe of, you know, providing other alternatives, other epistemologies from the global south that is not, as they emphasize, not really geographical. So when you mentioned the third point, which is about crossing borders, you reminded me also of the thinking across borders, which is another option, decolonial option proposed by Mignolo, you know, and also Walter Mignolo, and also by Adkbir Khatibi, who is Moroccan. And he labeled it as double critique, which is somehow, you know, thinking from the Western culture, but at the same time from the Arab-Islamic culture and from none of the two. And that's exactly another, let's say, epistemological disobedience. So do you see that this global south can be, somehow invested in performance studies, apart and away from, the age-old conversation about the hegemony of English in Central.
Right. Well, to not get too fancy about it, there remains, of course, an actual third or fourth world. In other words, of the world's 6 billion or 6.5 billion people, certainly more than half live in a social circumstance, economic circumstance, and a political circumstance that I would not want to live in. And I think one of our tests each of us has to ask is, would we really change places with this other person? And if we would not, what are the circumstances that prevent us from changing place with them? So I'll give you some personal examples. So I have very many close friends in China, and there is a Richard Schechner Center for Performance Studies in Shanghai. Am I about to move? And there's a study center there. Let's suppose, I'm not sure it's true, but let's suppose I could move to Shanghai and work there. Would I do it? And the question is, no, I would not at the present moment do it. And the reasons are complex. They're not material. They're largely questions of surveillance and control. At the same time, I'm very aware that I myself am being surveilled and controlled right in the United States. I've acquired from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, from the government, their file on Richard Schechner. I'm small potatoes, but there's a very thick file from that I'm able to get because of the Freedom of Information Act, of me being followed and this and that. Not as best I know at the present moment. Having reached the age of 87, they've kind of given up on me. But from the many years back, and they spent a lot of money looking after me, finding where I went, telephoning people and all. And this is so if this is the surveillance that the American government, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Army Intelligence Agencies, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I know who the agencies are, all put such effort into me. Can you imagine the effort they put into Abby Hoffman or Malcolm X or people today who are active? So it's not a question of not moving. It's the devil I kind of know against the devil I don't know. But then there's a question: would I move, let's say, to Zaire? Or would I move to a village in India? And that would be a question. Permanently move? No. Why? Because of material circumstances. So very many people forgetting about ideology, forgetting about surveillance, simply because of material circumstances, people from certain places want to get to other places. I'm sure that most of the people who set sail in the Mediterranean Sea, even though they say they are setting sail for political asylum, are really setting sail for economic advantage. They want to live a better material life. They don't give a damn what the government does. And most people throughout most human history didn't give a damn what governments do, as long as they personally were not being oppressed, maybe their neighbor, maybe somebody down the road in another town, and that they had their proper shelter and food. I think we I won't talk for you. I think I, as a member of a certain elite, have to acknowledge this, that the sheer material circumstances are extraordinarily important and have to also drive our thinking. Now, what can performance do about that? So there's a range of performative activities, what Augusto Boal pioneered in his various forms of theater of the oppressed is one kind of thing, and that raises social circumstances. What playback theater and psychodrama does for mental health is another thing. And then the production of great stories, whether they be Arabic stories or Old English stories or Hindu, Sanskrit stories. These enrich the human imagination to perform them. They don't have any immediate social consequences. One of the things I really love about Bertolt Brecht is that his plays have a social dimension, but they're great dramas. You read Mother Courage and Her Children, or you perform it. I mean, I directed it, and you get involved in Anna Fierling's life. It's everywhere as complex and interesting as Chekhov, and Chekhov doesn't have the same kind of political valence that Brecht does. But then I would say that if you get into Chekhov, there's no way that you can go into the heart of human emotions, depths, and actions and not be political. The political is the personal is the political. So it's a question then that we have as educators to make sure that our students, our adherents, understand those connections and promote those connections within and across cultures.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the personal is political, the private is public, and yeah, I mean, crossing the borders is one of the major questions. Maybe the third point will be, what do you think about, performance and the future of performance studies in the age of Corona and, of course, in the age of the pandemic?
Right. Well, Corona will be history in the sense that Corona will become like any number of other endemic diseases. In other words, malaria is always with us, has been. I mean, maybe we'll get rid of it, but it doesn't look like we're going to get rid of malaria very soon. In the third world, dysentery is always with us. In the first world, the influenza is always with us. So we should just realize that the pandemic, part of the thing about COVID, it is a terrible disease, there's no doubt about it. But the fact that we have this global information network means that we're aware of it so instantly everywhere. So now we're Omicron, I think it's called, the new variant. There are 26 cases in South Africa. There's no doubt that it will spread because we are, I'm laughing because the coronavirus is proof that we live in an intercultural world. We live in a world that's totally connected. If we didn't live in a totally, 500 years ago, the disease would be more or less localized. There weren't that amount, it would take longer. It wouldn't be localized, but it would take much longer. But the rapid spread, since it's spread from person to person, shows that people move about and there's no way to stop them moving about. So I think that the virus the world will somehow accommodate to it. I think global warming and the consequences of losing great territories, the consequences of desertification are, in a certain sense, we're being distracted by the first course of the meal, and we're not really paying attention to what's coming. On the other side, what will it mean that people can farm in Antarctica? What will it mean that people will settle in Greenland? We don't really know how these things will play out. We don't know what technological situation will mitigate some of the warming. I do know that great art comes out of the consideration and sometimes the unusual consideration of the horrors that face us. So let me give two very obvious examples. Sometimes great art from which history has been drained. So I go to the Great Pyramid of Giza, and I've been privileged to have an actual private tour after it was closed to the pyramid, up the pyramid and all. And it's a fabulous structure, there's no doubt about it, but it was built by slave labor. So should it be taken down, just like the statue of Robert E. Lee was taken down from Richmond, Virginia, because he was the Confederate general who supported slavery? No, we should not take the Great Pyramid of Giza apart stone by stone. Yes, we should acknowledge that it was slave labor that built it. And yes, we should acknowledge probably most of us would not like to have lived in Pharaonic Egypt, given the circumstances of life for most of the people there. But these questions of how to separate the art from the circumstances which generated the art, from the individual lives of the artists, or the artists good people or bad people. I'm for a very nuanced and complicated take on that kind of thing. We have to examine the social circumstances, and we have to present to our colleagues and students what they were. At the same time, we have to appreciate the accomplishment and note that human beings are extraordinarily complex and contradictory creatures. What we have in the cortex here has made us very hard to be made simple. And so, the other example I was going to give is Guernica, Picasso's great painting. I remember the painting of Guernica better than I remember the slaughter of civilians by fascist airplanes. That is the basis for Picasso having painted Guernica. What does that say about me? When I go to the Museum of Modern Art and look at the painting, am I immediately struck by the horror of, that painting came out? If I'm honest, no. I'm looking at the power of the painting. Similarly, if I look at El Greco, you could go down many artists. They're painting sometimes horrific scenes, Goya's Horrors of War, his paintings. And yet we look at these paintings for themselves also. And that's another complicating factor about art. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that. And we need to not constantly attack ourselves for being complex. We need to, I think, investigate our cultural complexity and to some degree celebrate it, even as we strive to make a more equitable and just society.
Thank you so much, Richard. When I asked the question, actually, I was also thinking about, the way Corona, for example, virus, during the lockdown, the whole industry of performance and performing arts in general, as an ecosystem, was crumbling down with the closing of theaters, with nobody in the streets, and the performances are not taken anywhere except online. This transformation, moving online, created a kind of conversation at least in the part of the world where we live, and people are no longer aware, or maybe are no longer happy with the confines and with the configurations of what is performance.
All right, I'll two answers to that. First of all, of course, this whole conference is a function of coronavirus and the lockdown. I would think that before there was coronavirus, more of us would be present in Morocco. It probably wouldn't be fully streamed. It wouldn't be on Zoom and so on. As you know, I myself was invited to come in person, and finally I decided not to come. The truth being, I was not fearful of what would happen to me possibly in Tangier, but I wanted to go to Marrakesh and to Fez and be in the markets and get close to people and breathe on them.
Definitely next year we do it. We do that next year.
I decided not to do that. So that was possibly a mistake, but it was my decision. I don't enjoy streaming performances anywhere near as much as I enjoy live performance, because for me, a large part of the performance experience is what the people next to me are doing, how they react, literally the body temperatures and their responses. I may be focused, of course, my plays are usually environmental theater, so things are happening all over, But even if I'm in a proscenium theater and I may be focused on the picture frame stage, I am aware of the people next to me and their reactions. And that to me is at least 20 to 50% of the entire experience. You know, what is the depth? We all have been in a theater where the depth of the silence shows how much people are focused. We've all been in a theater where the laughter is contagious. We've all been in a theater where, you know, the shock of it is important. So you can't do this in streaming. To some degree, what we're doing now, and I look out here and I see Torsten Jost, I see Erika Fischer-Lichte, et cetera, and I see some names. We are all each in our silos. We're together, but we're apart. And it's good to be together at such distances. I don't know if Erika's in Berlin or wherever she is. Apparently she's not in Tangier. So I'm in New York. I'm in my daughter's bedroom, actually. I decided not to go. It's Saturday here. I didn't go to my workspace where I would have beautiful books like Erika has behind me. I've got a bed. But so we're in our separate places. Performance is a collective activity. Performance is a communal activity. Performance is of a piece with religion. Or in other words, religious ceremonies are great theatrical performances, and theatrical performances have been religious ceremonies. This is not true. This is true not only of Greece, it's true all over the world in any belief system. Let's not even call it religion. Any belief system I've encountered, whether it's a political belief system or a religious belief system or an aesthetic belief system, they are all performances. They all share great similarities, and they all demand co-presence to be truly effective. I think ultimately we will simply adjust. People will go, even if some get sick. Hopefully everybody will be inoculated and we will have it under control. But people go to the theater now with common colds. So it depends on what the death rate is. People, with various ailments attend theater, go to restaurants, walk in the streets. And I think, humans are, among other things, extraordinarily adaptable. And we learn to live with certain things. One of the paradoxes of COVID, of course, is that the infection rate in the third world seems to be much lower than in the so-called first world. Now, whether this is because there hasn't been enough testing or whether it's actual fact, there's been some data that says people who have been exposed to malaria are less likely to get COVID. The Indian subcontinent, South Asia, had a huge rise in cases, and now it's fallen to quite low. So we don't really understand the life of the virus at a social level. We understand the life of the virus at a genetic level, but we don't really understand it at a social level, and why certain parts of the world are less affected, whether they'll get it later or not. But at an information level, we know that whenever something happens, it is broadcast immediately. It not only goes out on the official channels, but it goes out onto YouTube, goes out onto Twitter, goes out onto Facebook, all the multiple ways we get information and disinformation, both. So I think finally we will live with it. We will have our theaters open. We will have our restaurants open, and we will take the consequences.
Thank you.
What do you think? I mean, I wonder what some of the other people think. Am I being crazy here? Am I,
Can I ask
No, you're not. No, you are not. You are not. I think we think more or less in the same line. But it is, but I must admit, I think better we have this now. Just imagine, Richard, we haven't met for I do not know how many years, and now at least I can see you here on this Zoom. So it has it's good things, and so far I think since we know we can now not travel, we have to do it that way, and I think human beings are that way. Then we can adjust to certain situations that are there.
Exactly.
And we have to do. And I think people who sit there and lament, they will not make anything better.
Boccaccio wrote the Decameron. Boccaccio, in the middle of the Black Plague, wrote this great book, you know.
So let's now sit down us and we write the next book. So that's the opportunity. You
Yes.
say it. That's it. We'll do
Yes.
that, Richard.
At the same time, I want to come to Berlin soon and see you.
That would have been very nice, but
Yes.
alas, it's not possible right now.
Correct. So what are some others? What are some of the people in Morocco and the Arab world? I see there are other participants, people who I don't know. What do you think of these things?
Hi, Richard. My name is Kene Egono, and I'm academic dean for arts and creative industries at Middlesex University, London. Just to say that I do share your views, by the way. I think that just like the common code, just like the flu that comes every year, I think we will have to learn to live with COVID. And already different countries are beginning to open. As you know, in the UK, where I live, the government has actually opened up the economy and taking out most of the rules. There is a clamor, there is a demand for some of those restrictions to come back, but I think that we just have to live with it. And theaters are opening already. I enjoyed a lovely performance a couple of weeks ago, and I think that's the new reality, unfortunately.
Yes, I'm about to travel to Paris. I'm going to see Ariane Manouchkine and the new Théâtre du Soleil, and my grandchildren who live in Paris, my son. So, you know, unless the government comes and says you can't travel, we're on our way on December 21st.
Yeah.
So what about this idea that I proposed and that Khalid read also from this third world, this idea of getting, I think we already have it to some degree. In other words, a majority nowhere, a minority everywhere, and inside each other, and using performance as a tool, not only for human knowledge and enjoyment, but as Horace said, you know, to educate and entertain. So educate is the kind of political aspect of it. I mean, it's what Brecht loved when he did his Lehrstücke, et cetera, and so forth. Do you think that's a good idea, a valuable idea, a terrible idea? I'm kind of interested in the response, because I wrote that essay and nobody responded to it. So, I mean, Khalid responded to it, but aside from that, I've gotten, that book has gotten responses, but not to that essay.
I think it's a really interesting concept, and I'm quite intrigued to hear you talk about a fourth world already, when we haven't quite lived the third world. I like the concept. If you really think of it, I mean, now we're talking about the global majority. In the UK, for example, in order trying to not talk from a white-centeredness, a kind of spaces, we are beginning to talk about, rather than this acronym BAME, Black Ethnic Minority Ethnic, that they use in the UK, we are beginning to talk about BIPOC. We're talking about Black, Indigenous people and people of culture. And we're also talking about the global majority, which is non-white, a different way of articulating that, what you've just described. Right. And I think that's really interesting that we can, perhaps societies around the world can come to the point when there isn't any one majority in places. I mean, I think already it's happening, but it's happening digitally. We don't have that yet in terms of the geographic spaces, no. But digitally, certainly, we're beginning to see a shift where there isn't any defined majorities anymore, but rather we have a mix of minorities.
Right,
but that resists a different problem, doesn't it?
I would like to agree with you and challenge the notion of, quote, minorities. In other words, you know, that assumes the presumption of a kind of European hegemony. For myself personally, being Jewish and having some of my family perish in the Holocaust, et cetera, you know, when I enter in the US Census, it says enter race, I always enter other, but I enter it for two reasons. One, I'm Jewish, but secondly, you know, who knows? Genghis Khan and his forebears' genes are found in 8% of all Europeans. So, and race as a category, as a social category, it's enormously important. as a genetic category, it doesn't exist. So, and I would like to shift the rhetoric so we talk about majority, and majority means the so-called non-white or whatever. I mean, it's very hard to talk without using these categories, but I try to think of constructions of race, constructions of gender, constructions of identity. And that's where, for me, the performance model is so important, the rehearsal model, the restoration of behavior model, the model that we're in the constant process of devising the realities in which we live. Or as Clifford Geertz, the great anthropologist, said, we live suspended in the webs of meaning we ourselves have spun. And I think that's an enormously powerful image or notion or idea, that we live amidst the realities that we're creating. And that is an aesthetic statement. That's a statement about aesthetics. You know, art is a kind of high ground of that way of thinking. And so is experimental science. In other words, part of what fascinates me about relativity, you know, in quantum physics and indeterminacy, I don't understand the mathematics, but I understand the concept that a thing is only real in relationship to something else, and or a multiple something else, that it exists at the intersection of energy fields that are a part of the physics of physical bodies, that there is a metaphysics, but it's not the metaphysics of religion. It's the metaphysics of quantum physics. So those are very exciting concepts that, you know, are 100 years old now, but they're just, you know, starting to edge out Newtonian thinking. So race thinking is Newtonian thinking, and the kind of thing you're talking about is quantum thinking.
Richard, can I ask you a rather controversial question, and perhaps provocative question, actually?
Please.
I think your notion of performance has actually given people like myself and a lot of scholars from Africa, I write mainly about West African theater, the language to articulate what already exists. And the question then is, does it necessarily then need to take a Richard Schechner to help the Global South understand the frameworks, or the framework that they already exist within their cultures, in order to articulate in a way that is understood by everyone, both in the Global North and the South?
Well, you know, that is I once proposed a kind of a whimsical queen bee theory. The queen bee theory is that there are certain individuals in the hive that get fed by other things in the hive, and they become bigger. They're kind of elevated because they serve certain functions. In the beehive, the queen bee lays the eggs, et cetera, et cetera. But the queen bee is a, quote, ordinary bee who, for some reasons, I mean, I'm not an entomologist enough to know exactly what the biological things are, but an ordinary bee that is kind of, quote, selected to become the queen bee and is then nurtured by the others and becomes the queen bee and serves this function of laying all these eggs. So to some degree, all of us who are leaders, Erica, me, Khalid, you know, in various ways, are to some degree within our world's queen bees. We of course have ideas, and we're individuated and smart, and to deny that is ridiculous. At the same time, we're not as smart as we're made out to be, and the ideas kind of percolate, and it's also a kind of like a crystal, like what forms a snowflake. It's a super cooled water and then a tiny bit of dust, and it all radiates out into this marvelous system. So, you know, I would not exist without Irving Goffman, without Victor Turner, without, you know, Claude Lévi-Strauss. I could name a whole bunch of people who had ideas that fed into mine, were like mine, preceded mine. Some of them I was, you know, again, by accident or intent. I knew Irving Goffman. I worked very closely with Victor Turner. I slightly new Clifford Garretts. But you know, so these things occur. Now, if my thinking or the thinking attributed to me or the idea of performance studies, if I look in at Algiers and see the Fourja International Center of Performance Studies, of course I'm proud. But let me tell you, I was the person, I think, one of the first to use the word intercultural. And I know exactly where I got the word. I got the word while I was in the US Army in 1958. And I was stationed in Texas. And I had taken a trip from Fort Hood, Texas in Killeen to Austin to visit the University of Texas. I was very young. I was thinking of going to graduate school. I walked down a hallway and there was a window. I still see the window in my mind's eye. It said intercultural studies. I had no idea what it meant, intercultural studies, but I loved the word. And I took it, took it. And then later on used it in TDR. As far as performance studies came, the notion of performance, the word performance, I took it from Irving Goffman, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Chapter 2, Performances. And he defined performances, but it was broad, but still limited. It was the performances in everyday life, in normal life. And then there was a man that you probably don't know, Milton Singer, and he wrote a book called When Great Civilizations Modernize, I believe. And it's about the performances in what was then Madras, is now Chennai, India. And again, that was extraordinarily influential to me because he was talking about a whole cultural context. In other words, up until then in my education, I had learned about Aristotle, Shakespeare, it was very, very narrow. But my minor in college was philosophy and another one was psychology. So I was already interested in this stuff. And then when I found When a Great Civilization Modernizes, a kind of anthropological approach, and then Goffman and so on. So whatever happens because of a constellation of things. No one, the whole idea of restoration of behaviors, there's nothing original. There's only new ways of reorganizing. But that is what knowledge is. Knowledge is taking the materials around one and seeing them and organizing them in a different way. So it's always a tension between what's discovered, that is what exists, and you come upon it and you literally uncover it, and what is created. In a certain sense, the myth of God is a great one. Only the creator creates. The rest of us discover.
Thank you, Richard, for that very generous answer. And I think it's that sense of generosity with which you've answered that actually comes through your work. And I just want to say, from my side, I think that's why I found it quite easy to adopt your performance theories and teach to students. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, we still have like 5 minutes, maybe 3 or 5. Maybe we have somebody from the back. If you can, أعطيه الميكروفون. أجل هنا أجل هنا. تفضل.
Good evening. So thank you very much for the extremely important presentation. I was listening with a lot of interest and care. Indeed, the use of the term the fourth world is very problematic, especially that we are today into the decolonial perspective on what it means to be located and probably epistemologically dislocated in the global south, where the struggle, even in terms of scholarly communities, is for emancipation, that is, to get upgraded into the first world or probably the second position. Then suddenly there is an act of epistemically speaking, and I do understand that the postmodern is much more powerful in terms of creative thinking, in terms of epistemic thinking. And that's why probably the global south is now, from a postmodern perspective, downgraded into the fourth position. And that's, for me, goes against this shifting geography of reasoning into the global south, where the main question is freedom. So it's not only about texts and discourses and academics like us being sort of middle class, say whatever, critics or intellectuals, but it's also about geographies and spaces. How would you comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think to some degree you misinterpret what I've said. The fourth world is the world of the artists. So, and the fourth world is both interior in everyone, some part of us, and a minority in all different kinds of societies, let's say societies. Artists and intellectuals of a certain kind constitute the fourth world. I was using Nehru's model of the third world. He was proposing in a time when the world was, there was the Cold War, it was seen as a struggle between two superpowers, the USSR and the USA, and two systems of economics, capitalism and communism at that point. And he was saying, that's not the only alternative. You don't have to choose between Twinkledum and Twinkledee. There is also this enormous resource, which he called the third world. I mean, it's his term, and then it was picked up, this enormous resource of what he said was, quote, moral authority. He meant it did not necessarily equal the military might of the USSR or the USA at that point, nor did it equal the economic strength of those countries, but it had a kind of moral authority in the depth of its civilizations in Africa and Asia especially. And I was picking up on that and saying that we as intellectuals and artists do not have the might in terms of economics, in terms of even usually administrative force that our governments and our militaries and our corporations have, but we have a, quote, moral authority in Nehru's sense, and I was saying that's an aesthetic authority. That's an authority to see the world and construct the world in different ways. And in this sense, we are not locatable either in New York or Nairobi or Delhi or anywhere, although we are present in all those places. And I was asking, and I think the very existence of this conference shows that you're ahead of me. And I mean, the essay is a few years old, but you've picked up on it, that this moral authority, this aesthetic authority, be formalized to some degree, as Nehru's third world was, and made operative. And then I specified certain qualities of performance. Those were the 4 points of my manifesto, which I won't repeat, but you can read them and so on, to mobilize that kind of thinking. I didn't intend, and I'm sorry if you understood, any kind of disrespect or denigration of people who are not living like I am in New York or have my privileges. I am, as respectful as I can. No one obviously is perfect, and we always make mistakes. Our most, if we have a good heart, as some of my Yaqui Indian friends would say, a good heart, our mistakes are unintentional, but they're mistakes nonetheless. And with people of good heart, the mistakes are often, you don't know you've made them. they're inadvertent. So if I've made any good heart mistake, I apologize for it. But what I intended was what I've just summarized.
Thank you so much, Richard. It was very clear, you know, absolutely no mistakes about that. And when I quoted, you know, from the third word of performance studies, definitely it resonates exactly with the thinking of the Global South. So definitely it's a different terminology and nothing else. So once again, I would like to thank you so much for being with us, and hopefully next year, definitely you should be here.
I certainly, I appreciate it, and I would, if it's at all possible, if I'm physically and mentally able, I will be there in Tangier next year, and
not only Tangier,
like a
you
side
bring
trip to
some
Berlin
times
to
with
see
you.
Erica.
We promise, you know, to take you around Tangier and Fez, you know.
Terrific. Thank you. My
Thank you
regards
so
to
much.
all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks for Erica Fisher and for everybody. I think we have a performance now. So please join me to thank Professor Richard Schechner. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Yeah, but now he promised. No, it's another building. The back.